Shalom from Israel. I'm Sorko-Ram reporting from Tel Aviv, and I want to welcome you to Israel Frontline, your guide to Israel and the Middle East. We want to give you information you'll probably not hear in the mainstream media regarding life in Israel and the Israeli-Arab conflict. And we'll add a biblical perspective to our reality. This is our third episode in a series of 4 concerning the United Nations. Today we will talk about the United Nations Human Rights Council, examining whose human rights it is really fighting for in our world full of violence and injustice. On the program today, Human Rights Commission dissolved and replaced. The UN's world divided into 5 regions. The Council's attitude towards Israel. And later, our panel guests will share their Israeli perspective regarding human rights and Israel. In the early 20th century, many diplomats from around the world saw a need for a worldwide peacekeeping mechanism. And in a very real sense, the UN is a world government. It was created to reconcile disputes between nations and maintain international peace with security. To deal with specific human rights abuses, a new UN Human Rights Council was established in 2006. This was after a former UN Human Rights Commission was deemed so morally bankrupt and corrupt as to be likened to a jury that includes murderers and rapists. Its obsession with incessantly bashing Israel was so blatant that the US and the other Western countries finally said enough. A resolution establishing a new UN Human Rights Council was passed, with high hopes from the West. Its protocol stated, members elected to the Council shall uphold the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. What these world powers did not and do not understand is that man is fallen, selfish, and greedy. Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus, revealed that the God of this world is evil, and his operatives are intensely involved in deceiving mankind 24/7. With this viewpoint, we can now understand the UN's utterly irrational activities and why it does what it does. First, a short review of the structure of the United Nations. The 193 member states are divided into 5 blocks: Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America together with Caribbean states, and finally, Western European and other groups. All member states naturally fit into one of these blocks. That is, all except one. Guess. Yes, although Israel is geographically located in Asia, the Muslim countries would not consider including Israel in their region. So for years, Israel was the only nation in the world that could not sit on any UN body where membership in a regional group was required. Nor could it be elected to leadership in any of the vast number of committees in the UN system. Finally, in 2013, Israel was given permanent status in the Western European and other groups region.
I Stand with Israel is a benevolence outreach of Maoz Israel Ministries. Since its establishment in 2002, we have distributed over $4 million to meet the practical needs of Israelis, believers and non-believers. We support Arab believers and Ethiopian congregations. We provide financial aid and medical assistance. We grant education scholarships to students and children who study music. We partner with other ministries and sponsor conferences. We help individuals and businesses persecuted for their faith in Yeshua. Because of the generosity of our partners around the world, we have a privilege to help people in need, reaching out to them with the love of God in a practical way. We invite you too to stand with Israel.
For the new Human Rights Council, the 193-member nations of the UN's General Assembly elected 47 members each for a period of 3 years. 13 from Africa, 13 from Asia, 6 from Eastern Europe, 8 from Latin America and Caribbean states, 7 from Western Europe and other groups. As I said, there were great hopes by many at this second attempt to create a real human rights council. A council that would be able to intervene with moral authority in nations where civil rights are terribly abused or even non-existent. Alas, today's UN Human Rights Council, or the HRC, has exactly the same DNA as the former commission. Of course, because the participating countries are the same ones. As you can see, the 26 votes from Africa and Asia are a majority, and most of those nations are Islamic. The God of Islam is spearheading the action and the intentions of the United Nations. So in the 25th session that took place in March 2014, 10 resolutions were passed which censured the actions of specific countries. 5 of those were leveled against Israel. Indeed, the Human Rights Council saved its wrath for Israel. Its 47-member council voted 46-1 in favor of 4 separate resolutions condemning Israeli treatment of Palestinians. Only the U.S. voted against. 3 of the resolutions censured Israel for human rights violations in the, quote, occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem, end of quote, which of course includes the Western Wall. It criticized the existence of Jews living in the West Bank, known to Israelis as Judea and Samaria and East Jerusalem. In truth, each of the HRC condemnations of Israel in every session are basically the same. Here are some examples. The HRC, quote, demands that the occupying power Israel stop the targeting of civilians and the systematic destruction of the cultural heritage of the Palestinian people, end of quote. You see, Palestinians claim Yeshua, Jesus, and biblical personalities were Palestinians, not Jews. The Human Rights Council condemns Israel for claiming to possess the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Note how the world's emotions are stirred up when biblical sites are claimed by Israel. Another condemnation, quote, demands that Israel, the occupying power, immediately cease all diggings and excavation work beneath and around Al-Aqsa Mosque, that is the Temple Mount. Here, they are hallucinating. Of course, Israeli archaeologists would love to dig under the area where the first and second temples once stood. However, they don't dig there because they don't want to start World War III. And here's another one. Quote, the HRC demands the occupying power, Israel, release Palestinian prisoners, end of quote. The condemnation fails to mention the prisoners were convicted of murdering Israeli civilians. The 4th resolution of the 25th session passed the harshest ruling of all. It decreed that a mandatory debate on Israel's behavior must be held at every single Human Rights Council meeting. Israel is the only country on the Council's permanent agenda. I see this as raging insanity. But perhaps the most masochistic resolution ever produced by this world body was the next resolution condemning Israel for not giving the Golan Heights to Syria's Bashar al-Assad, the butcher of more than some 300,000 of his own citizens. This resolution passed 33 for, 1 against, again the U.S., and 13 abstentions. In other words, the nations of the world demanded that Israel give the Golan Heights to warring Syria, knowing that would certainly mean the slaughter of hundreds and perhaps thousands of Druze now living peacefully and securely in Israel. It says to me that the nations do not care about the well-being of the Syrian people. Not at all. In the same session, more nations voted against Israel than they did against Syria and Iran. Equally depressing is the fact that not a single European country, not England, Germany, or France, had the guts to stand up for Israel. In 4 of the resolutions, they all voted against Israel, and only in the resolution to force Israel to give the Golan Heights to Syria did a few European countries decide the insanity was so grave they would simply abstain. Not vote against it, heaven forbid, just abstain.
One of the ways Maoz reaches out to Israelis is by supporting the Hebrew-speaking, Spirit-filled congregation Tiferet Yeshua in the heart of Tel Aviv. It is a place of intimate worship, corporate prayer, and powerful teaching for believers. But non-believers at the services always marvel at the love they receive from the people of God. Just as Yeshua said, through this love, they will know we are His disciples. Join us in reaching Tel Aviv and all of Israel.
A good book can make a real difference in a believer's life. The goal of Maoz Hebrew Books Division is to bring great faith books to Israeli readers in their language. We translate, edit, typeset, and print these books in Hebrew, and then make them available in congregations across Israel.
Yes, the world is turning ever so swiftly against Israel. In a nutshell, the Human Rights Council, since its creation in 2006, has condemned Israel 50 times, exactly half of the total of 100 resolutions censoring specific nations. The Jewish nation received as many condemnations from this renowned world body as did all the rest of the world put together. The United Nations Human Rights Council is a kangaroo court, a self-appointed tribunal that violates established legal procedures to deliver sham judgments predetermined in disregard of the facts and the law, and obsessively strives to put only one defendant, Israel, on trial. I used to wonder why God inspired His prophets and apostles to promise so many times in the Bible that in the last days God would bring His people Israel back to their own land and save and deliver them, not only spiritually, but also physically. I no longer wonder. Here is this tiny nation of just over 6 million Jews and 1.7 million Arabs, with almost the entire world against her. What chance would she have to survive without God? But here's just one promise from the Bible. I will bring back the captives of my people Israel. They shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. I will plant them in their land, and no longer shall they be pulled up from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. Stay with us as we now turn to a discussion with our panel of guests.
Maoz Israel Ministries is a Messianic Jewish nonprofit organization based in Tel Aviv. We exist to be a witness of the good news to the people of Israel through outreach, discipleship, and raising up godly leaders. We translate and publish outstanding faith books in Hebrew and powerful testimony books to reach non-believers. We have a Hebrew outreach website with original media content produced by our team. We support the Hebrew-speaking congregation Tiferet Yeshua in Tel Aviv. We sponsor and host seminars and conferences. We support our Arab Christian brothers who love Israel and the God of Israel. Our I Stand with Israel Fund serves as a benevolence outreach, meeting the practical needs of Israeli believers. Our dream is to see God's promises fulfilled until the day when all Israel will be saved.
We will now turn to our panel, asking them to share their Israeli perspective on the Human Rights Council, growing anti-Semitism in Europe, and the prophetic significance of these events. Today in the studio with us are Director of Operations for TBN Israel, Mati Shoshani from Jerusalem, and Shani Ferguson, co-founder of Yeshua Israel Ministries, also from Jerusalem, and Israel Pachter, pastor of Beit Hallel Messianic Congregation from Ashdod in the south of Israel. Welcome and thank you for being here. We will start our questions with some that are not so easy to answer, but here we go. Human Rights Commission was dismissed because of its corruption, and it was replaced with the Human Rights Council. The commission was replaced by the council. Now, what do you suppose was going on in the minds of those leaders there in the UN that went from the commission to the council? What were they trying to do, and what were they expecting to do, and why were they expecting it to happen?
Well, the person who was responsible for decommissioning one organization, basically changing the name and setting it up again, was Kofi Annan, who was the General Secretary of the UN at the time. And he said about the commission, he said, they're so imbalanced in their actions that it's going to discredit the entire UN. And that's, if it's coming from him, it means a lot.
Yes.
I mean, he's not a very stand-up-ish kind of guy. So if that, I'm being polite. If he said that, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
Basically, they're working with the material that exists, though, and the majority of the UN is non-democratic countries. We keep going back to that.
Yeah.
You change it, you dismantle it, however you make it, as long as you have equal representation to the different member states, you're going to have a vast majority of non-democratic states who have an inherent interest in preventing any discussion of what's going on in their countries, and all the interests in the world are focusing interests or the agenda of the Council on Israel.
Okay, so the perfect storm is when you have a democratic process with autocratic countries under that.
Exactly.
Would you agree with that?
Exactly. So
it doesn't work. It doesn't work anywhere in the world.
It hasn't worked so far, and it's actually worked in a very detrimental way for the good of humanity and mankind. Because
why doesn't it work?
Because countries who are opposed to human rights as an idea, as an ideology, are promoting their agenda through an organization that is supposed to promote human rights.
And when they're the majority,
they get to set the agenda.
They set it, and they make it happen as they see it. So if it's Saudi Arabia and its friends, then in a democratic election, what do you have?
You have
Saudi Arabia.
Again, you have a majority of non-democratic states. And just to help people understand why this is important, when you have X time, 100 hours of discussions a year, and you get to set the agenda, you don't have time to talk about forced marriages in Saudi Arabia, for instance, about executions in Iran, or any one of the other huge grievances going on in the area, because they set the agenda. So you never get to those topics.
You also have a fundamental flaw in the way the elite process the world, because you have people who really believe that humanity is evolving and we're somehow becoming better, and if we just try again without God, this time, maybe this generation of humans have evolved into like better
better.
people, and so they keep trying to read why they would destroy one commission and try to start the same thing with the whole new group of people, or
Right.
it's just fundamentally they think that humanity is becoming better, and humanity is ultimately flawed without God.
Exactly. So, Israel, how does this fit into biblical and prophetic scripture concerning the nations of the world coming against Israel in the final days?
Yeah, it looks like a biblical scenario. When I watch what's happening in Europe, when I see all the agendas there, it really looks like a preparation. You know, the Bible says that even plan of Antichrist is unfunctioned. It's already on the way.
Yes.
And we need to be aware of these things. So you see, like Mati said, majority of countries in UN, they are not democratic,
Yep.
but they come in against democratic country in the Middle East
Yes.
instead of supporting it. So there's lots of things are not rational, but you can understand them when you know the Bible. And when I see it, you know, when I was a younger believer, I was worried because, you know, you want to see truth, you want to see the European countries, democratic countries function in a better
Yes.
way.
Yes.
But then I just learned from the Bible that there are certain things in the Bible, Jesus said about them, it shall happen. It just shall happen. What will happen in the future. So what I see, it's happening. Of course, as a believers, we're praying, and prayer make a difference. But the bottom line, certain things will happen, and nations will come against Israel. And this process,
Right.
or these circumstances are in the process.
So,
But I just want to comment on that, though.
Yeah.
There is a battle going on. I don't want to have an escapist theology and say, oh, bad things are going to happen, let's just let them. No, there's a real battle going on between good and evil, and the platform in this case is the UN. They're using it. Many people who are evil, and to say they're not godly would be a compliment. They are diabolical in their nature. These people are promoting a negative agenda against God's promise, against God's prophecy, against God's plan for this world. And we have a chance, and the UN is a platform, to counter that theology, to counter that mindset, and present something that is God's will, that is His idea. And I'd say human rights are definitely high on God's list of good things in this
Yes.
world.
And I would like to add to it, you know, in UN, inside of UN, there is lots of good people. It's a fact. There is
Right.
lots of good people.
Yes.
There's even believers there
Yes.
who see what's happening, but they have no control. So it's interesting having good people on the board, but at the same time, the general
Right.
picture is pretty sad.
Shani, I want to ask you a question. In the recent votes against Israel that are always taking place in all over the place in the United Nations, even Europe, they're democratic countries, but they vote against Israel over and over again. What's going on there with Europe?
You have a little bit of a tie-in. Both Europe has been infiltrated in every sense of the word by Muslims over the past several decades, and it's been families that just come and have kids and increase the population and immigration, and so that tied in with anti-Semitism, which has still been festering even though they took a big hit, you know.
And where did that come from? Where did European anti-Semitism come from? Where did Hitler get his?
You know, some could argue that it came from Christian writings in the Dark Ages and replacement theology, people that believe that the Jews, you know, rejected Jesus and so therefore they are now cursed, and then that kind of bleeds into people that don't even believe in Jesus, but they still believe that Jews are cursed. So that is tied in. There's also all sorts of myths about, you know, Jews really trying to take over the world, and so people are afraid of that. So it's just like all these weird stories that bleed into culture, and of course if they're not exposed, and then
No, I would like to add to it. You see, Europe have its own roots of anti-Semitism and its history, but today it's changed, and the driving force of anti-Semitism today is actually religious, and not the Christian religious, but mostly because of Islam.
But you know, the liberals in Europe seem to be, that are so intolerant of Christianity or Judaism even, they don't have too much problem with the Muslim religion. Isn't that interesting?
I don't know if they don't have much problem as much as they're terrified to have a problem.
They're afraid to have a problem.
Like, if you have a problem with Christians, what are they going to do? Like, what pray
will
for
pray.
them?
They will
You know,
pray.
if you have a problem with Islamic people, then the radicals will go out on the streets and, you know, do beheadings and do, post signs and riot and burn
So
things.
you think it's mainly fear that the liberals, you think so?
I want to add something to this equation. The fact that it's very much fear, but it's fear of foreigners. And what we're seeing, politically speaking, in Europe throughout the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years, is extremist right-wing parties coming to power, generally speaking. There are certain exceptions to that. And they say, they're basically xenophobic. We're against foreigners. We're against foreign influences on our country. And the problem is, like both of you have said, they can't aim that at the Muslim population because they're too loud, too vocal, too dangerous of a minority. So they aim it at other minorities. And Israel is one of those examples. They're trying to disconnect from the foreign policy that requires involvement in the Middle East, and at the same time appease this minority. And again, it ties in also to just this deep-rooted anti-Semitism that they have.
Right.
And I know people in Europe, I know churches in Europe who are standing for Israel, who are going out and even doing demonstrations. They are in Switzerland and Sweden, in England. There are people, but with the time it's more and more difficult to them because Europe is changing, also is changing. And many times it's became even violent when it comes to Israel.
Yes.
And also they want to reach out their neighbors, which is Muslims. So many times they need to make again and again new decisions what to do.
Yes, yes. Well, I think that's all we have time for. That's it for today's Israel Frontline. Thank you for watching, and we hope we were able to give you facts and insight which will help you pray in a more focused way for our nation and also for your nation. For more articles about Israel, sign up to the free Maoz Israel report at maozisrael.org/signup. Don't forget to join us next week for the 4th and final episode of Israel Frontline examining the United Nations. We will concentrate on the UN Humanitarian Aid Organization and the issue of Palestinian refugees. On behalf of our team and myself, blessings and shalom from Tel Aviv.
The Maoz Israel Report app brings the free monthly Maoz Israel Report publication right to your fingertips. All the reports in all available languages, videos and bonus photos, all in one place, on your tablet or smartphone. Download the free app today and get the insider's perspective of the way things really are in Israel.